Hello, and welcome to HWA Rhode Island's celebration of Edgar Allan Poe. I'm going to read a brief intro as to why we decided to have this event. So when Edgar Allan Poe visited Providence in 1845, he met Sarah Helen Whitman in the backyard of her home on Benefit Street, inspiring both poems To Helen and an eventual relationship between the two poets. We asked, we had this reading and we asked members of the HWA and members of our writing community and our friends and family to join us tonight to celebrate Poe's 213th birthday with an evening of both original fiction and readings of Poe's work. Most of us are in the place, Rhode Island, that greatly affected one of Poe's most vital relationships in the years leading up to his death. We do have a Rhode Island transplant in Lauren to Australia, but and Joshua is not in Rhode Island at the moment as well, and Tiffany's in Connecticut. We're all in Rhode Island in our hearts. So yeah, we have a really wonderful. My live broadcast is feeding into my own stream. Sorry about that. So we have a great evening of, like I said, original fiction and readings of Poe's work. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first reader. So Steve, I actually don't have an updated bio for you, and I would love to let our listeners know what you're all about and what you're writing and what you're interested in writing. So if you want to give a brief intro for yourself and then take it away with your flash fiction piece, the floor is yours.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Belanger. I'm a short story writer. I've had about 10 or 12 pieces published, including one about 3 weeks ago. I write horror, mystery, speculative fiction, non-genre pieces. You pretty much name it. I've pretty much written it, I guess. So today I'm going to read a previously unpublished piece called Plunge. And I'm reading it on Poe night because it's got a bit of a taste of The Telltale Heart. Combine that narrator with a self-hating junkie, and you've got this narrator, I think. So without further ado, this is Plunge. I used to be one of those skeletal self-hating junkies. Their nirvana was a warehouse of shattered windows, jagged glass, and rotting wood in the streets of a city nobody knows, where nobody goes. Except these horse addicts, these nobodies. They're such nobodies that nobody cries when one of them dies. I'd been a nobody, got lazy, got hooked, got fired, pissed away my money, pissed off my family, my friends. Started going to that roach and fleabag hotel with my shit and my needles and my elastics and nothing else, because I had nothing else. Soon my arms and the webs between my fingers and toes had more pinpricks than the moon's got craters. Countless times I took the plunge and pushed some good shit into my veins, and I drifted, I flew, I soared to the sun, to my own blue sky nirvana up in the clouds where I ruled, where I looked down on those losers like you, the somebodies who are actually nobodies but don't know it. Have you ever soared like I have? Have you ever felt so free? There, on my blanket, amongst the rats and human vermin, I could just be. I'd push the plunger and take the plunge and say, fuck it all and just be. I was free. From the rat race and the rats and the rat traps. From my pseudo-family and faker friends. From even those fucks on the street who frowned at me just because I didn't have nice shirts and shoes, a car or a job, or a damn care in the world. From all those nobodies all my life who thought I was the loser, I was free. Well, until my OD. In my depression and aggression, I pressed the plunger too far. I took too much shit, or I took some really bad shit, and I took the plunge into the big sleep, the deep sleep, where I soared and I had big black wings and I felt so light, so right. And I was really, truly flying. The earth beneath me, such a brilliant globe of green and blue and crystal white. Its halo, such a shockingly bright white. I thought I jumped out of my skin. True transcendence. I was so free, I didn't even need my damn body. But then the pain came, in every pore, in every vein. I felt my mouth pop open, my chin knocked my neck, and I thought my jaw would snap or spasm to my knees. Fire shot through my teeth. Blood caked my lips, and I convulsed so hard I thought I'd snap my own back. I hit my head upon the floor. I rolled and I shook, and then I was exhausted and still. A long time later, I opened my eyes to a hell of a searing pain. I'd wet and soiled myself, and I'd bled from my nose and lips. An emaciated, bearded, barefoot man sat cross-legged, staring at me, his open mouth a black cave and all that hair. "We got some really bad shit, Jack," he said. "But no way, man. I knew better. We each owe a death," someone said, maybe to me, maybe I'd heard it in a movie. But that phrase, that thought, that perfect idea was a sledgehammer in my skull that day, and I groaned and I cried because it's true. We each owe a death, me and you, and I'd escaped mine. And so that moment I stood, and I fell, and I crawled to a young blonde woman lying next to me, the needle and invitation sticking right out of her arm, and she was all fucked up and eyes fluttering as fast as a hummingbird's wings and floating in the clouds of her own blue sky nirvana. Yeah, she was my first. The bearded, barefoot caveman was gone. 6 other nobodies were sleeping or junked up. I just placed part of her yellow, natty blanket over her mouth and lightly held it there, and it was just that easy. She was gone, and she never even opened her eyes. I'd owed a death, and I'd paid in full. And nobody cared. She was found 6 days later, a runaway, a prostitute, a homeless junkie, I forget. It didn't matter. She was a nobody. And I'm still a junkie. I average one nobody a month. Mills, alleys, shacks in the woods. I know all the places because I'd been a nobody. I'd been there. Different warehouses, different states, abandoned people in abandoned places, shattered windows and shattered lives. For a few years now, I've done them all. And I'm still free. Free of the shit and free of your shit because I know what I'm here to do. We all owe a life, me and you, and so that's what I do. A palm, a blanket, a pillow over a mouth. I depress their own plunger a little bit further and send some that way to their own big sleep in the sky. I use their own holes in their own skin because they've got more pinpricks than the moon's got craters too. And I still get high. It's the highest high there is. I still take the plunge. And nobody knows. And nobody cares. Nobody. Nobody at all. That's it. Thank you.
Unmute my mic to clap. Thank you so much, Steve. That was wonderful. Thank you for starting us off. All right, for our next reading, we have Joshua Rex reading one of Poe's most notable works. Joshua Rex is an American author of speculative fiction and an MA in history candidate at Bowling Green State University. He was born in Sandusky, Ohio, and grew up between the Midwest and New England. He is the author of the novel A Mighty Word from Rotary Press and the collections The Descent and Other Strange Stories from Weirdhouse Press and What's Coming for You, also from Rotary Press. His short fiction has appeared with Night Script, Pseudopod, Tales to Terrify, and others. He is the host of the podcast The Night Parlor, where he interviews authors, artists, historians, and musicians. He lives, for now, in Ohio. Take it away, Josh.
Thank you, Christa. Is there any way you can maximize the screen for the reader by chance through there? Or is that not possible?
I've been trying to figure that
Okay.
out.
No problem.
Because when I do that, you just see me, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, it's kind of annoying. I'll Google it. I'll Google it while you're reading and then figure it out.
All right. All right. First of all, we'll light a candle for Poe's B-Day. Happy birthday, Poe. And the piece I'm reading, The Raven, everybody knows, it's first published in the Evening Mirror. It's a New York magazine in 1845. Of course, caused a literary sensation around the world, made him a national celebrity. He used to, kids used to chase him down the street, calling him the Raven, and he'd turn around and flap his arms and say, nevermore, nevermore. And one little other detail, the bust of Pallas in the story, excuse me, Pallas is the Greek goddess of wisdom, Pallas Athenia. She represents sanity, wisdom, scholarship. So the raven perching on the bust of Pallas is this symbol of actually questioning the speaker's rational mind. So just a little background on that. So this is The Raven. Once upon a midnight, dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, for many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my book surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard something louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped her stady, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched, sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven. Ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me like my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled by the stillness broken, by reply so aptly spoken. Doubtless, I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster follow fast and follow faster, till his songs one burden bore, to the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet, violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfume from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee. Respite in nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil. Prophet still if bird or devil. Whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted. Tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil. Prophet still if bird or devil. By that heaven that burns above us, by that God we both adore. Tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within a distant Aden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest in the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seemings of the demons at his dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul, from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted nevermore.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josh. So I did figure out how to make you the solo reader so everyone can see. That was phenomenal. So impressive. I am able to see everyone still that's listening from our group, and you had big smiles from everyone, and that was just wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, well, I am actually going to read next, so I guess I can put myself into the solo stream. And just a little bit about me and what I write. I had a collection come out a few years ago called Something Borrowed, Something Blood-Soaked from Unnerving. I've had additional short fiction published in Vasterian, which I'm going to read from tonight. I've work coming out soon from Wicked Run Press, work in Nightmare Magazine, nonfiction, from Fireside, Year's Best Hardcore Horror, and a couple, anthologies. I am located in Rhode Island for HWA Rhode Island writers who are interested. And for now, like I said, I'm going to read a story that was heavily inspired by The Telltale Heart. It's sort of my feminist or female perspective version of The Telltale Heart, exploring nagging guilt. So here we go. And for the occasion, I, of course, had to find a bookmark that included Edgar Allan Poe. All right, this is called Vulture Eyes. I actually don't need these. On a hot July evening, on the corner of Elm and Main, she sees the dog she used to barricade in a closet and the baby whose arm she squeezed until it bruised. She is sober, having just departed a local cafe, and her view is unobstructed. The dog, a boxer, is broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, his eyes chocolate brown and sad. The baby sits in an uncovered car seat beside the dog, his complexion pallid, wearing a diaper and nothing else. They are beneath a full-bloom wisteria on the grounds of the town's 183-year-old train station, and are accompanied only by one another. Though there are plenty of passers-by, Iris knows she is the only one who can see them. She holds a baby carrier of her own, though hers is clean and clearly expensive. The coffee date was for a friend to meet her infant daughter. Constance, who'd been cooing happily to herself a moment ago, now seems muted and far away. In fact, all the sounds of the bustling street are registering to her as if she's hearing them from underwater. She tries to swallow and isn't sure she succeeds. The muscles in her throat aren't responding to her commands. It makes sense that they would appear to her now that she is happy and has something to lose. Strange, though, to not think of either one of them for so long, yet have every memory associated with them return in an instant. The flood of emotions, guilt mostly, but self-loathing too, is so immediate and intense, she wonders if maybe those memories weren't so far off after all. Likely they'd subsisted beneath the surface of her consciousness, waiting for the right time to emerge. They stare at her from under the tree with eyes veiled with rancor. And something else. Maybe restraint? Or is it patience? A single word wells up the tightening corridor of Iris's throat. But nothing follows, and she isn't sure what she was going to say. A group of teenagers passes before them, and for a moment, Iris thinks the dog and baby have vanished. When the last of them, a pink-haired girl holding a skateboard against her lanky body, is gone, Iris sees that the sullen, silent pair remains. A strangled cry rings out, and startled, Iris looks down. She's holding the carrier in such a way that Constance's face is directly in the sun. Iris's guilt is a snake's jaw stretching to accommodate this latest offense, but her baby's distress has at least broken the spell. She pulls the carrier's canopy down and lurches forward, vowing to tell no one of what she's seen. What on earth would you even say? As she leaves the train station in search of her car, she does not dare to look behind her. Constance is such a wonderful baby, friends and family members tell her. She's a good eater, hardly fusses, and a 2-month-old sleeping through the night is practically unheard of. Iris smiles and holds her daughter close, thinking but not saying that it would not matter if Constance fussed constantly and didn't sleep a wink. Iris loves her. She is, however, exceedingly relieved to find this is the case. For how does one know such a thing, truly know it, before it's come to pass? She supposes she could have looked to her relationship with her dog, Bird, for an understanding of this love. She has adored Bird with unparalleled fierceness since the moment she brought him home, but has never been able to muster much affection for other canines. Still, for all that love, there have been times over the last 12 years she wishes she could take back. Jabbing a finger in his face after a neighborhood-rousing bark on a quiet Sunday morning, or yanking the leash with a savageness disproportionate to his behavior. The justifications were always swift and judicious. It was late. She was exhausted. It was pouring. Everyone got a little impatient sometimes with their pets, but she often wonders if a better person would have been able to keep their emotions in check. Leading up to Constance's birth, she told herself she was that better person. It was a way to ensure nothing would go wrong, or give herself an out if it did. If she lost the baby, it was because she didn't deserve her in the first place. But then the pregnancy went smoothly, and she refocused her anxieties on the newborn stage. You'll fall asleep with her in your arms. You'll suffocate her. You'll trip down the stairs and drop her on your head. You'll return to the nursery to find her dead in her crib. She continued to use her pessimism as a shield, but the first time Constance looked up from the changing table and treated her to the purest of open-mouthed grins, Iris felt that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to be happy. Until the ghosts appeared. It's been 4 nights since she saw the boxer and baby, and Iris is struggling to keep the past where it belongs. Maybe it's the quiet house. Her husband, Lars, is finishing a novel while Bird snores softly at the end of the bed. She sits in an armchair in a corner of the living room, sipping a scotch on the rocks. She isn't supposed to drink while nursing, but Constance is asleep in her bassinet, and Iris doesn't expect her to wake for a meal until morning. She is thinking how the closet in their foyer is of fairly standard design. There's room for their winter coats, boots, a tub of birdseed, an electronic rat trap, and the vacuum cleaner. The closet in her old apartment may have been smaller still, or perhaps her possessions had been more austere. There wasn't much to push aside when she turned that closet into a cage. The foyer closet is visible from her chair, and the door is ajar. The slice of shadow keeps drawing her gaze, so she stares into the dregs of her scotch instead. She is too fearful she'll find eyes glaring out at her, doleful and accusatory. Drugstore junkie, jilted woman, jailer. She finishes the scotch and sets the empty tumbler down on the hardwood floor. The click of Bird's toenails announce his approach, and he gives her a pleased, I found you look before going to the door. Iris hurries for his leash, clips the collar around his neck, and scratches him behind the ears. She does not rush the Weimaraner down the steps. And though she's tired and a little drunk, she lets him sniff the grass and snap at moths for as long as he wants, beneath the hooded gaze of a waning moon. She sees them again 3 days later on the way to her daughter's 2-month checkup. She is running late and juggling the carrier with a diaper bag, wristlet, and keys. The app on her phone claimed a 10% chance of rain, yet the first fat drops are splattering the asphalt and sending up the scent of petrichor from nearby flower beds. She is fatigued and distracted, checking for oncoming traffic as she crosses the parking lot. Looking up to find them staring directly at her steals the breath from her lungs. They are in the alley between the medical building and the automotive shop. Though shielded from the rain by an overhang, water drips from a damaged gutter. It pools in the car seat where the baby's toes clench and unfurl beneath the trickle. The boxer's eyes are black in the gloom, and he sits as still as a sphinx. Iris turns her attention back to the baby's car seat. She remembers now the way she hadn't a week earlier where that car seat ended up. Long before Constance, before Lars, this new life, before whiskey evenings and coffee afternoons, Iris, along with her childhood friend Petra, spent their days pursuing more unsavory drugs endeavors. She has crossed to within 30 feet from the entrance, but in doing so has drawn closer to the ghosts. Iris shakes her head forcefully, as if she can jar the voice right out of her brain, but the word is repeated, and she realizes it's the baby who has spoken it. Drugs. That's all you and that skanky friend of yours cared about. Drugs and avoiding responsibility. Iris steps a few feet to the left so as to be obscured from other patients passing through the automatic doors. It was just Adderall, she surprises herself by saying, as if answering a friend that she's happened to run into. And the occasional ecstasy tablet on nights out. How are you? She cuts the question short. Who would be foolish enough to ask a ghost how it's speaking? A ghost could do anything it likes. And the voice had to be that of a ghost, for no baby sounded the way it did, all raspy-throated and choppy like a computer simulation or a water-damaged robot or a voice coming up through layers of gravel and stone. Right, the baby says, all the girls who befriended my father told themselves that lie, and that skank befriended him to the point where he was willing to go on a run for you two, even when my mother had their only car. We didn't know he was going to have you with him. She means for the words to come out with conviction, but they are hollow, pointless gibberish. But he did have me with him, car seat and all. You were driving, but your skanky friend told you to get in the back, and since she knew my daddy better, you listened. He put me in the back seat, and you asked him some dumb question, like how old I was, like you cared. But he didn't hear you. He and your skanky friend were talking, and so you and I were left to stare at one another. Rainwater slides down Iris's neck. It wasn't raining when Alejandro had materialized on the sidewalk with his baby and a sheepish smile. I didn't know anything about babies then, she says. Now I'd say you are 5 months. You could hold your head up, but you were still a bit wobbly, and you could smile, but couldn't speak. And smile was what you were doing, and at me, no less. It made me... She pauses, remembering. His tiny mouth had curled up at seeing a new face. But what did he have to smile about? If he only knew his father took him along on drug runs, maybe he wouldn't feel such unbridled joy. She frowned at him, stuck her tongue out. He kept smiling, undeterred. Maybe it was the jitteriness that made you do it, the baby says. I mean, you insist that you were never addicted, but you certainly didn't feel good that day, waiting for your bottle of Addies, your concentration cure. Is that what turned you into a bristling animal, all sharp teeth and sharper claws? Or was it the uncertainty you felt over your future, over babies? Maybe that was it. Or maybe it was the most banal, cliched reason of all. You did it because you could. And I'm going to stop there. All right. Thank you. Okay, so let me make sure I don't have any participants waiting to get in. All right, so our next speaker, we're going to move back to a little Poe honoring. We have Lauren Elise Daniels, a Rhode Islander living in Australia for over 20 years. L.E. Daniels still hangs on to her Yankee accent. After winning the 1987 Newport Poetry Contest Junior Division, Lauren earned her BA in Writing and Literature from Fairfield University. Through the 1990s, she worked in Boston for Ziff Davis Publishing and completed her MFA at Emerson College. Her novel, Serpent's Wake, A Tale for the Bitten, was published by Interactive Publications in 2018 after shortlisting with Singapore's Half the World Global Literati Awards and ranking 4th in the People's Choice Award. In 2020, Lauren co-authored Winning Short Story Competitions, Essential Tools for the Serious Writer with Kate Sawyer and published by Hawkeye Books. Lauren's New England Gothic short story, Burnham Hall, appears in Dark Ink Books' Generation X anthology, and her ghost story, which she read a portion of for us at one of our last HWA readings, Spooned by the Dead, will appear in Timber Ghost Press's Out of Time True Paranormal anthology in mid-2022. An editor of over 100 titles, Lauren also directs the Brisbane Writers' Workshop. All right, I'm going to unmute Lauren and make her our solo speaker after I kick myself off of being the solo layout. Hold on. There we go. All right, Lauren, take it away.
Thank you, Christa, and beautiful reading as well. I'm going to read Annabelle Lee. This is a lyric poem published by the New York Tribune 2 days after Edgar Allan Poe died. 9th of October, 1849. It's believed to be written in memory of his wife and cousin, Virginia Eliza Clem, who died from tuberculosis at the age of 24. The poem expresses one of Poe's recurrent themes, and that is the death of a beautiful and beloved young woman. The reason I chose this is that my father used to read this to us before bed. After which I would always say, leave the hall light on, leave my door cracked. Great way to start a writing career. Thanks, Dad. Okay. Annabelle Lee. It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabelle Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than a love, I and my Annabelle Lee. With a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabelle Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of a cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabelle Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabelle Lee, and the stars never rise, and I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's a great bedtime story. I think we can all agree with that. All right. Moving right along, and I think we're pretty close to staying with our agenda. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Tiffany. Tiffany Liang is a Taiwanese-American writer from New England. She was the recipient of the 2018 Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley Scholarship and graduated from the Stone Coast MFA program in 2020. Her work has been published in the Long River Review. She is currently working on a novel, among other things. All right, Tiffany.
All right. Your name. Me who believe myself made from iron, against the fire of flesh, I catch fire and consume myself for the eyes of a stranger. Dear Dr. K, per our discussion during our first session, I will try to put into words here what my mouth could not at the time. As your patient, I hope this knowledge will prove useful in my future treatment, but above all, I wish to have your understanding. My parents immigrated to New England from a country experiencing civil conflict. I suppose civil conflict in one country wasn't enough for the two of them, because they argued all the time, though separation was never brought up. It was one argument right as my mother went into labor with me that resulted in me receiving my mother's maiden name instead of my father's. Mother wrote it in while father was in the washroom and lied through her teeth to the nurse that it was, quote, an old world tradition, something about daughters belonging to the mother and sons to the father. She was determined to get the last word in and was not above underhanded means. I was the firstborn in such a marriage, and to say that I have issues with my parents is an understatement. My father's presence in my upbringing was overbearing, unwelcome, and constant, and despite my mother's initial guile, she was the more lenient and understanding of the two, though her share in my upbringing was scant with the coming of my siblings. Outside of my family, life was better. It was obvious from a young age that I had an overreactive imagination, the result of trying to escape from the stern reality of my father had put upon me whilst simultaneously grasping for my mother's attention. We lived but a stone's throw from Salem, which did nothing to dampen my habitual flights of fancy. During school recess, a lot of girls, including myself, played witches. We'd gather leaves and berries from nearby fields for our potions that no one ever drank and cursed boys who were mean to us. The boys only participated to catch us, put us on trial, and burn us at the stake. The trial was a mere formality. Every one of us was found guilty, some multiple times through various incarnations. For most of the children, including myself, this sort of play lasted throughout primary school. Others continued. Secondary school and the desire for more fitting of adulthood was what ultimately smothered my creativity. My father brought down upon me the expectations of an eldest child and the figurehead of the family's newest generation. I was not to play witches or any sort of childish things anymore, which, coupled with the increase in responsibilities, was probably what led me to hypochondria at the time. Any known ailment that reached my ears I had until proven otherwise. I am certain a few decades prior, medical experts would have deemed me hysterical. Out of that hypochondria, though, doctors were able to determine that I did in fact have a nervous condition and a respiratory system prone to infection and shortness of breath. The novelty of illnesses eventually wore off before the end of secondary school and did well to curb the majority of my paranoid hypochondria. Besides, I'd grown sick of being unwell. The week I was supposed to go up to the college and choose my courses, I found myself stricken with my old enemy, bronchitis, due to the changing of seasons. As a result, by the time I was well enough to choose my classes, Many of the standard courses the college required outside of the major were already filled. Art, music, history, psychology, even philosophy. The only thing open were a 2-semester biology course or a 3-semester chemistry course. The idea of having to eventually cover human anatomy and biological systems and the risk that such topics pose to my bad habits deterred me from biology. Chemistry had long advanced from its roots in alchemy and the quest for eternal. So, although it would take longer, what harm could it do? Due to the nature of my chronic bronchitis, I was advised by the administration of the college to go out of my way to introduce myself and make my condition known to my professors in the event the illness should rear its ugly head at an inopportune time during my study. Let me be clear in saying that there were no grounds for my following obsession. The men I used to like, the men my father wanted me to like, and the men my mother liked. None of them impressed me nor left my heart aching with need. Certainly, the first meeting did not leave me wanting anything except the beginning of our first lecture. A man of my height and my mother's age, no gray, but auburn hair reminiscent of dying embers, thinning, not balding, upon a Julian brow. The only thing oppressive about him were his eyes, which were not the blue of the sky, but a deep oceanic blue, reminiscent of sirens pulling men under. The spell was not cast overnight. I am a creature of habit, and the scarcity of other female students meant that I was always the only woman in the first row in order to have my full attention in the lesson. At least, that was the intention at first. And I'll cut it off there.
Thank you, Tiffany. That felt very Poe-esque. Love it.
Thank you.
All right. Oops, I just took you. Sorry. Here we go. All right. Next up, we have Paul Magnan. Paul has been writing stories that veer from the straight and narrow for many years. He has had stories published in Fantasy Scroll magazine, The Horror Zine, The Literary Hatchet, Sanitarium magazine, and most recently has had a story included in the anthology Violent Vixens, an homage to grindhouse horror, published by Dark Peninsula Press. His 4-novel dark fantasy series, Kaio the Unknown, is available on Amazon, as is his short story collection, Veering from the Straight and Narrow. He lives with his family in the wilds of Rhode Island. Take it away, Paul.
Okay, thank you. This story is titled Saturn Conjunct, and it answers the age-old question, is it possible to commit murder through the use of astrology? Well, we'll try to answer that. Poe, along with horror, was also a pioneer in the genre of detective stories and stuff like that. So I'm hoping it does justice to his stories like that have a macabre twist. I do want to say that my story does deal with themes of domestic violence, and while there are no explicit scenes of such in the story, I do want to issue a trigger warning to anyone who may react badly. I certainly hope not, but I do feel the need to issue the trigger warning. And lastly, this is the second story today where the main character is named Iris. Okay. Iris brushed back a strand of blonde hair and studied the bi-wheel chart. The inner wheel was Art's natal chart, with all the planets in their terrible, afflicted glory. The outer wheel was an event chart, based on planetary positions over the town at 10:45 p.m., 10 minutes from now. Immediately after 10:45, the moon would exit Virgo and be void for 2.5 hours before it entered Libra. The police response had to happen during that brief window. She looked out at the winter darkness. A long drive, glistening with black ice, snaked through the cluster of trees from the road that surrounded her house. Iris wondered how fast Art would drive under these hazardous conditions. Mars was prominent in his first house. Iris smiled. Art would have the accelerator to the floor. She took a sip from the porcelain cup at her elbow. She swished the spicy tea around in her mouth before she swallowed. Within minutes, she knew she would see a set of headlights coming fast down the drive. While one did not need to be a slave to the characteristics they were born under, some, like Art, embraced them. Heather, please reconsider this. You gave me the data to draw up his chart. You've always trusted my advice. Please trust me now. Art is no good. Get rid of him. Heather shared the same blonde hair and hazel eyes as her sister. She folded her arms across her chest and shook her head. You're wrong this time, Iris. Art's not as bad as you're making him out to be. He's decent and charming. He's never disagreed with me, never alone raised his voice, or become in any way violent. He's just not like that. Heather, he's charming because he has Mercury in Libra. That'll make anyone silver-tongued. But he has Mars in his first house with an Aries ascendant, and if that wasn't bad enough, he has Uranus in his fourth house, under affliction and squared against the ascendant. And he has transiting Pluto conjunct Moon in the 8th house under Scorpio. Those are aspects of violence and death. To see all this in a person's natal chart, it's just scary. Art is capable of terrible things, and nowhere in his chart do I see restraint. Heather turned away. You're wrong. Have I been wrong yet about any of the men in your life? Hasn't each chart I've drawn up been accurate? Heather, I know you think you really like this guy, but he's all wrong. Please believe me. Heather looked up, her face set in stone. Iris's heart sank as she saw her sister's moon and stubborn Taurus come to the fore. You're wrong this time, Iris. You wait and see. 2 weeks into the relationship, Art insisted on moving in with Heather. A week after that, Heather got her first shiner. She insisted it was due to her own clumsiness. Iris pointed out that Heather had taken 5 years of ballet and was one of the least clumsy people in the world. When Heather finally admitted the black eye was given by Art, she was quick to insist it was her fault, that she had provoked him. Iris again pleaded with the sister to dump Art. Heather just shook her head. Heather and Iris could not go out to lunch together without Heather's cell phone ringing every 5 minutes. Art demanded to know who she was with and when she was coming home. Heather admitted to Iris that Art was always checking her cell phone to see what calls were made and what texts had gone back and forth. I'm calling the police, Heather. I'm sick of seeing this animal treat you like this. Iris, no, don't. There's no need for that. No need? Heather, fucking wake up. If something isn't done, he's going to put you in the ground. Jesus Christ, you're blowing it all out of proportion. It's not that bad. Art is right when he says you like to stick your nose in other people's business. Leave it alone, Iris. Listen to yourself, Heather. Listen to this crap you're spewing out. Please, get away from him. Get a restraining order. You can stay with me until he clears out of your place. You just don't get it. Leave me alone. Leave us alone. Iris lived at the end of a long drive in a house outside of town. The area was heavily wooded with venerable yet hardy elm, oak, and maple trees concealing her property from the interstate. Her nearest neighbor was Mrs. Venditti, a widow who visited once or twice a week to share a cup of tea and chit-chat. Iris heard the cop pull in front of her house and smiled, made sure the tea was ready for Mrs. Venditti. She opened the door. Art shoved his way in, his tall, powerful body nearly knocking Iris to the floor. He stood and looked at the charts and graphs on Iris's work desk. What a load of rubbish, he said. I can't believe you're trying to fill Heather's head with all this shit. Who the fuck actually believes in this nowadays? Get out of here, Iris tried to keep her anger on top of her fear. You're not welcome here. Get out. Iris turned to her. His dark eyes glittered and his slick, bestial hair stood on end. White, carnivorous teeth flashed in a smile. Is that any way to treat someone who's practically family? Come on now, Iris. How about some hospitality? Iris turned to the telephone. Steel fingers gripped her shoulder. I'd hate to see that phone, or anything else, get damaged. We're not done talking yet. Iris jerked away from Art's hand. She did not try to move toward the phone. What do you want? You mean you don't know? What kind of an astrologer are you? I thought you could see into the future. Iris remained silent. She resisted the urge to rub her bruised shoulder. Art chuckled. It's simple, really, what I want. I want you to mind your own fucking business. I want you to stop filling Heather's head of all that shit In fact, I want you to stop talking to Heather, period. She doesn't want to see you or talk to you anymore. Keep out of our lives. Iris glanced toward the telephone. With a quickness that belied his size, Art was upon her. He grabbed her hair and forced her face up to his. His lips smashed against hers and his tongue pushed its way into her mouth like a fat serpent. Iris struggled and tried to scream. Art pulled away before Iris's teeth clamped down. He backed away and smacked his lips. You taste just like your sister. I bet you're livelier in bed, though. Iris spat on the floor, the taste of Art's tongue thick in her mouth. Art's face stilled. Just remember what I said. You keep the fuck out of our lives. If I have to come back, I won't be nearly as nice. Get out! Just get out! Art smiled and left. Outside, his fiery red Mustang roared to life and shot down the drive, coming dangerously close to the trees as it flung back loose pebbles. Iris locked the door and walked to the kitchen. She sat on a wooden stool next to the pot of tea. It took a long time for her to stop shaking. She should have called the police. She didn't, fearing it would solve nothing and put Heather even more in a line of fire. She would never forgive herself for that decision. The form in the hospital bed was barely recognizable as her sister. Heather's face was swollen and garish with bruises. Her left cheekbone and orbital socket were shattered. She was unconscious and the doctors weren't sure when she would awaken. They had assured Iris that Heather would recover, but that another beating as severe as this could result in brain damage or even death. Iris held Heather's cold, unresponsive hand. Tears glittered and spilled out of her eyes. He was out on bail. Unfucking believable. The cops had arrested Art, and then the idiotic judge had actually granted the defense lawyer's request and set bail, which Art made. Now the beast was free until he was sentenced for the aggravated battery charge his douchebag lawyer had plea bargained for, as it was clear that Heather would pull through, and the prosecution would not have a manslaughter charge. Art would get a year or two in prison at most. And there was no doubt in Iris's mind that Art would return to Heather once he was out. And Heather, damn her, would probably take him back. That was unacceptable. Iris did a location chart for the town and plotted its progressions until she found what was needed. A Mars-Saturn conjunct with Mars in retrograde, squaring Art's ascendant, along with retrograde Mercury in the 3rd house, and a transiting Uranus in the 8th house squared against Art's natal sun. All of which fell in an hour ruled by Saturn, just before a void moon. This astrological event would occur at 10:45 and 3 more nights, the last Friday in January. Iris took the time to redo the chart to ensure that her calculations were correct. There was no variation, it was perfect. The apartment Art was staying at was about a half an hour away, and with the way he drove, it made it closer to 20 minutes. And in the mood he would be in once he was done talking to Iris, it would probably take him no more than 15 minutes. On Friday night, Iris swallowed down her nerves and called Art's cell phone. Timing was everything. She dialed at 10:20, certain the conversation would not last long. After 2 rings, Art answered. "Who's this?" Art's voice brought Iris's anger to the fore. "It's retribution catching up to you, you piece of shit. It's time for you to pay for what you did to Heather, and I'm not talking about jail time." "Iris, what the fuck are you talking about?" "I'm talking about cosmic justice, you bastard. You're not going to get off as easy as you think you are." "Iris, you better stop right now if you know what's good for you." "Fuck you, Art. It's time to flush you down the toilet." "Iris, shut up or you do nothing, you fucking pussy. I'm not my sister. You can't mess with me." "You don't fucking think so, huh?" Art's rage entered the red zone, and Iris knew she had him. "You better fucking run, bitch, because I'm going to show you just how much I can mess with you." The phone clicked off. 10:25. It would take Art a couple of minutes to grab his jacket and jump into his car. Then he would push that red Mustang to its limits over roads that were slippery with ice. But the main roads would have been treated, and Art did have some skill as a driver, so he would make it to Iris's drive. It was essential that he make it to the drive. The minutes crept by. Each one tore a little more from her nerves. Iris could sense the planets above moving along their assigned, inalterable paths. The planets did not care about what was happening below. Their business transcended anything puny humans could devise. 10:35 turned to 10:40. Iris took a sip of her tea and willed herself to calm down, telling herself that everything was happening as it should. She looked at her watch. 10:44. What if he wasn't coming, she thought. What if Art got held up in traffic or was pulled over for speeding? That would ruin everything. Then she would need to run. Headlights stabbed through the trees, twisting it to drive serpentine angles and approaching at a fast rate of speed. Iris took a steep, deadening breath and looked at her watch. 10:45. A moment of perfect conjunct between Saturn and a retrograde Mars, with a retrograde Mercury in the third house, which produced poor judgment and mechanical failure, especially if affecting those whose natal chart showed considerable affliction, like Art's. A fuel line blockage caused the Mustang to stall and lose its power steering, just as its wide tires hit a patch of black ice. The tires clawed for traction that was not there and could not swerve from a massive elm tree. The muscle car plowed into the trunk with an explosion of metal and glittering, fragmented glass. Iris rushed to the door and cracked it open, listening for any movement. Remarkably, the Mustang's headlights still illuminated the area, though the angles of the lights were skewed in unnatural directions. There was a slight hissing sound. Iris put on her coat and grabbed a long kitchen knife. She walked the 50 or so yards in the cold darkness toward the wreck. The hissing sound came from a radiator that had been shorn in half. The hood of the car was buckled in a U shape around the gouged trunk of the tree. Sections of the engine rested in the front seat. Art lay face down in the drive on a bed of pebbled glass that shone like bloody diamonds. He hadn't been wearing a seatbelt. Upon impact, Art had flown through the windshield. His body was torn, broken, and still. Iris checked her watch. 10:55. The planets above continued on their courses, unconcerned with the tiny bit of carnage beneath them. The moon was leaving Virgo. In 2.5 hours it would enter Libra. During those 2.5 hours, the moon would be void, a time when a lot of commonplace things got messed up. Details, routinely handled, were missed, like those from an accident scene investigation. The police response would take about 10 minutes. They would request an ambulance, even though it was obvious the driver was beyond help. They would question Iris, but they knew who Art was. They would assume that Art had a grudge against his girlfriend's sister and was looking to settle matters before going to prison. Iris would express shock and surprise, and the void moon would keep the police from seeing Iris's number as the last call received on Art's cell phone. Iris walked back to her home and dialed 911. Hello? I'd like to report an accident. And that's it.
Oh, hello. I'm looking for Prince Prospero. Has anyone seen him? Well, if Prince Prospero isn't here, I suppose we'll have to settle for Steve. Steve, if you wouldn't mind reading one of my favorite stories, an excerpt from The Telltale Heart, if you would.
No problem. Hello again, everyone. Thank you very much. The Telltale Heart. You've probably heard this story before. It's a short story, of course, one of Poe's shortest stories. And originally it was published in January 1843 in the first issue of The Pioneer, a literary and critical magazine, which was a short-lived Boston magazine edited by James Russell Lowell. And likely Poe was paid about $10 for it, which even in 1843 wasn't a heck of a lot. So I'm going to start roughly in the middle. And so the narrator, who kept on trying to say how sane he was while wanting to kill an older man because of his eye, he has already gone into the man's room and he's already opened the lantern and the light. And here it goes. Have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled a heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot, whatever. I'd been too wary for that. A tub had caught all, ha! When I made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves, with perfect suavity, as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt now I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observation of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose over all and increased. It grew louder, and still. The men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more, I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. And that's it.
Thank you, Steve.
And in celebration of Poe's birthday, I have a large piece of chocolate cake, which I'll have in a few moments.
Wow, Steve, great minds think alike.
Right?
Because I'm sharing a piece of cake right now with my little friend here.
Oh, well, then I'll have a quick bite now as well. Look at that. Aren't you guys jealous?
All right. We are rolling right along, and we have a new guest that has joined us. So I'm just going to pop Victoria into the stream here. Welcome, Victoria. All right. So Victoria, I'm going to let you get a little bit settled. Actually, we're going to have Lauren read, but since Steve just read, I popped him out for the moment. We just wanted to give you a welcome. We have Lauren back with us now, reading an original piece called The Howling Places. Welcome back, Lauren.
Thank you, Christa. I chose this as a story with a familiar Gothic setting. And also, it's a story that occurs in one night, the night of November 9th, 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, and inspired by the Russian folktale Baba Yaga figure, and also Tim Robbins' Jacob's Ladder film. I wondered what that would be like, the similar sentiment, but with an older female protagonist. So this is The Howling Places. Crowned by Goliath beech trees on the main boulevard of Spectacle Cove, Rhode Island, the marble facade of the Rollers Manor shines spotlit and ghostly beyond the wrought iron fence. Unlike other Gilded Age mansions of the avenue, its gate, topped with lethal fleur-de-lis, is wide open, even after the tourist season has ended. Dark hedges line the drive, and leaves tumble in droves across the cobblestones. Beyond the 60-room manor, the drive branches off discreetly into packed gravel cloaked by a trio of white oaks. Past the Siberian crabapple trees, their fruit blazes red and yellow in daylight, but black at night, sits the former cart shed that once housed horses, coaches, and tack. Here and all around the back of the property that ends in a cliff, the Atlantic growls under a waxing moon. Below, scrabbled tidal pools of black shale and sandstone lie deep in shadow as the autumnal wind howls over pitted stone, cut by the movement of Ice Age glaciers. Aside from the peaked roof that once welcomed coaches and a horseshoe embedded in the lintel, any signs of horses here are long gone. In the 1940s, the Spectacle Cove Preservation Society bought the manor for events. The cart shed was claimed by the hospital on the mainland and became the carriage house home for aged women. It washes and feeds about 40 of the island's near dead, secreted away from summer robber baron tours and winter weddings. Now, precisely 100 years after the first layered honey cake was served with extravagance in the manor's imperial Russian tea room, 2 women lay dying in its carriage house as blood-red oak leaves sail over the grounds beyond their window. They've stopped pulling their wrists against the restraints and no longer twist against the harnesses that lash them to the bed frames. No longer must they conceal the secret that binds them, or strain to see who's there in the dark? Thank you.
Thank you,
you.
Lauren. Fabulous job. Such atmosphere.
Thanks.
All right. Okay. We are now going to welcome Victoria. I will take a quick moment to read her bio since she is, we had a couple repeat readers, but she will be reading for the first time for our event. All right, Victoria's dark short fiction has appeared in over 25 anthologies, and her first novel, Parasite Life, came out in 2018 through Chizine Publications and will be re-released in 2022 through Nightscape Press. She's a member of the HWA and the New England Horror Writers. Her short story collection, Les Femmes Grotesques, will be out in 2022 with Clash Books. Victoria also co-edited the Necronomicon 2019 Memento book with Justin Steele. And Victoria is going to be reading an original piece, and she is welcome to introduce it more than that or just get going reading.
Hello. Sorry, I had to come in late, putting children to bed and all that. So the story I'll be reading is called The Girl in the Stairwell, and it originally was in a women's annual horror collection, and it'll be in my short story collection that comes out in the fall as well. And I figured it would capture some more of the human madness aspects of Poe. So, all right, The Girl in the Stairwell. Her body lay crumpled in the alley stairwell, limbs akimbo. She reminded me of a contortionist at rest, or a spider in wait. Of course, she was neither of these things. She was, in fact, just a woman who had been pushed or fallen, or some combination of the two, down the flights of unyieldingly cruel concrete steps. And the fall had sent her careening, arms windmilling, ass over tea kettle, as my grandmother would have said, and finally landing in a heap, body shattered and very dead. Her head was cocked at an odd angle and looking up at those who looked down the stairs at her. There was a strange defiance in the jut of her chin and her unblinking stare, gazing up as if to say, so what? I was the first to venture down, cautious, on my own teetering heels, until finally on the fifth step or so, I just slid them off and ran barefoot down to the fallen woman. Cement was icy under my feet and made them ache. She must be so cold. The thought skittered through my mind as I reached her, crouched down, and touched her arm. She was not yet cool, but cooling, and there was something strange about a warm, dead girl. I felt her pulse as if it'd make one difference. She was rearranged like a half-completed Rubik's Cube. This close to her, I noted how lovely she was, her skin fair with a delicate sprinkling of freckles, and the freckles made me think of her as girlish. She probably hated those freckles and daily wished them gone, but to me, at that moment, they made her much more real. And her hair was long and brown with a sheen of coppery red to it, and her eyes were hazel green, surrounded by thick lashes, coated in a heavy black mascara, and they stared ahead, unseeing. I took her hand, feeling an intimacy bloom. I would now be the one who found her body, who stayed with her. She was a stranger to me, but being so near her stillness, feeling her soft skin in my hands, made me feel closer to her than anyone I'd ever known. And I wondered then if her soul floated nearby. Was she bobbing just above us like a tethered balloon, watching me, another girl from the club, a stranger who came out to have a smoke and instead found her body bent and broken, all alone in her deathly glory? Would she appreciate my hand in hers? Or would it mean nothing to her because she wasn't there anymore? A jackal-eyed crowd formed above us, and someone hollered down that the police had been called, and I nodded and resumed my vigil, kneeling and shivering barefoot next to her. But I kept holding her hand. I knew everyone watching would assume I was her friend. And was I lying by omission, stealing this tragedy, co-opting her demise? Did holding this girl's hand make me like a woman who poisons her children for attention? Guilt and shame cascaded through me as I crouched there in that cold stairwell. Still, I never let go of her hand, never told the people watching from above that she was a stranger, a fact that I could have revealed as a sham at any moment by a friend or a date looking for her, and it made it all the more exciting. I only let go of her hand when I noticed her small clutch glinting between her torso and the ground. Miraculously, the little spangly purse had not torn off in the tumble. The chain was slung around her body and had held firm. And inside I found her license and stared at the smiling photo. Melinda Johnson, 25 years old. Melinda. The name did not fit her at all, and it felt dated, like something from my mother's yearbook. My heart beat fast. My body was covered in nervous cold sweat as I glanced at the crowd milling above. But before I knew what I was doing, I slipped the ID into my own purse, as well as the single key on a ribbon beside it. I resumed holding her hand, noting it growing colder and less pliant. "Move aside, people, police, break it up." I heard a deep voice call before I saw the man, but soon he was standing at the top of the stairs looking down. And he was older, with dark skin, square face, and when he saw me, cowering and shoeless, holding Melinda, his expression softened. "Miss, I'm going to come down now." Was I the miss? Of course, I must be, since Melinda was in no position to respond. "I'm Officer Bennett. Could you please step aside so I can check on your friend?" He was treating me so delicately, like I was made of the finest glass. And I had to bite my cheek not to smile at him. Instead, I lowered my eyes and let go of her hand. As soon as I moved, he leaned in, his size and warmth crowding the small landing. Above, on the street, the ambulance had arrived, and 2 EMTs waited at the top with a stretcher. Officer Bennett felt for a pulse and carefully looked at Melinda, and he sighed, and he turned to me. "I'm so sorry, miss. She's gone. Let's get out of the way and let the EMTs do their job. I can take a statement while you warm up." He led me up and out of the stairwell, where I slid on my heels back on and teetered my way to the cruiser. I looked at all their staring faces, painted red and blue from the car's flickering lights. They watched me with such bare curiosity, so hungry for answers. What happened? Who was she? Who was I to her? I swelled with the attention, reveling in this new position of power. The EMTs brought Melinda up and out in a slick black bag. Officer Bennett, ever the pro, tactfully distracted me from the body being removed. It was such a smooth maneuver that I knew he must have done it many times in his life. And I felt a twinge between my legs at that, a wave of excitement brought on by the drama of death, caught in the chaos of violence and loss. Holding a small notebook and pen, his eyes were all for me alone. What happened? She fell. She was not very steady on her heels, and she just fell. I see. Had she been drinking? Had she been? I was at the club. She was dressed to go out, and it was late. It would be strange if she wasn't. She was. I'm afraid I don't know how much, though. You came together? Did we? A bubble was filling inside of me, making me giddy. No, we came separately. I think she planned on taking a cab home. And what's your friend's name? Melinda. How did you meet? Oh, it's a funny story, really. I work at a clothing store, and she came in, and we were both wearing the same dress, like one the store didn't even sell. We were so like that, just alike. It's like we were sisters in a way. And what was her last name? A ripple of panic as I racked my memory. Johnson, Melinda Johnson. The friendship was new, but we connected. It's like we'd been friends forever. It's hard to explain. I stared hard at him, my eyes welling up. Right. He wrote it all down, talked a bit longer, took my info, and then he let me out of the car. He'd offered to give me a ride home, but I couldn't trouble him with that. Instead of cabbing it home, I hung out by the stairwell, chatting with the crowd. And I talked about my friend Melinda and her tragic end, and I was hugged by drippy-eyed strangers. A handsome man offered to buy me a drink, and since I shouldn't be alone after such a tragedy, and I heartily agreed. And we went someplace quiet and intimate, and we had drinks, and I took him home. And we fucked. And he was on top, and I gazed over his shoulder at my purse on the bedside table, picturing her ID nestled in there next to mine, like best friends or sisters. We're that close. And that's the end of that story.
Thank you, Vicky. All right. Well, everyone, I think with 7 participants reading and all sorts of different original work, flash fiction, Poe's poetry and prose, and costumes and cake eating, and yet we fit it about 4 minutes off of the planned agenda. So that is exciting, and I just want to thank everybody for participating. And I was going to close, since for the people that joined late or anybody that just missed this part, one of the reasons, a lot of us have been inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, and Edgar Allan Poe has a lot of connections to a lot of different places, obviously Baltimore and Boston, and a handful of others. But I did highlight on this event page that when Edgar Allan Poe visited Providence in 1845, he met Sarah Helen Whitman in her backyard of her home on Benefit Street, and it inspired his poem to Helen and an eventual relationship between the two poets, and Poe's connection with Rhode Island. So in addition to it being his birthday today and a lot of us HWA Rhode Island writers being inspired by him, we wanted to do something on his birthday as a celebration of his work and that which has inspired us. So I was going to read just the last two stanzas of To Helen in closing. But before I do that, I want to give everybody a chance, and I'll pull myself out in just a second and put Steve back in. I want to give everybody a chance to, say any quick closing remarks that they would like to, or, whatever they wish to add briefly.
An enormous thank you to you, Christa. Thank you for organizing us. This is brilliant.
Thanks
Thank
indeed,
you,
Christa,
everyone.
and for everyone who's listening. Sorry, Lauren, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you, Christa, for putting this together, and great readings by everybody. It was fantastic. I'd like to do this again sometime.
Yep. Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I also hope to do it again sometime.
All right. Sorry, Steve. Since I took you out before, you were the closest to take out again. You're all very welcome. This was just as much fun for me. And one of the great things about, being in a lingering pandemic has its many cons, but it is nice that we can put something together where a lot of us wouldn't have been able to come together, and a lot of us have Rhode Islanditis, and even if we could come together, we wouldn't travel farther than 10 minutes across the state. So this is a really great way for us to have an event. There was one other thing I was just going to say. Oh yes. This is a live recording at present, but as with our other readings that we have done, we are going to keep this posted on our HWA Rhode Island channel. So I hope all of the participants share this so that people can have more of an opportunity to hear your wonderful original work and see your amazing talent in reading Poe's amazing work. And I'm going to put it up on, the HWA Rhode Island page of my website, and we'll share it on social media, and hopefully people that weren't able to attend tonight will be able to see the great readings that we all did. So in closing, the last two stanzas of Poe's To Helen. But now at length, dear Dion sank from sight into western couch of thundercloud, and thou, a ghost, amid the entombing trees, didst glide away. Only thine eyes remained. They would not go. They never yet have gone, lighting my lonely pathway home that night. They have not left me as my hopes have since. They follow me. They lead me through the years. They are my ministers, yet I their slave. Their office is to illumine and enkindle my duty, to be saved by their bright light, and purified in their electric fire, and sanctified in their Elysian fire. They fill my soul with beauty, which is hope, and are far up in heaven, the stars I kneel to in the sad, silent watches of my night, while even in the meridian glare of day I see them still, two sweetly scintillant Venuses, unextinguished by the sun. Happy birthday, Edgar Allan Poe. Thank you, HWA Rhode Island, and we'll see you all soon.